Hello and welcome everyone to this special episode on Omkarapathshala. There are few people who will get so much excited to get conversation again and again. And this is the time of the year when you want to learn about budget once more or revise budget basics once more. Who better than Ananth sir? He's a institution in himself. Last year he was with us. He helped us to learn. This year again he has helped us that he will be our teacher once again. And Ananth sir, you don't need any introduction, so I will not waste time on that. But thank you so much. Dil se aapke aane ke liye.
And Dil se, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed last year's conversation. I learned a lot from you, and I'm hoping to get some nuggets from you as well. So thank you for having me.
No, sir. It's very humble, on your part. So, sir, ये budget, नाम बहुत बड़ा है. सब डरते हैं पता नहीं क्या हो जाए क्या नहीं हो जाएगा. A lot of data which is there all over. So let's start with just basic things, okay? But if you can help us to understand what is budget. पहले तो एक budget होता क्या है? What is the need of the budget? And last time you were there, you can speak in Hindi, English, whichever language you prefer. But people who don't know anything about budget, किसी को मालूम ही नहीं कि budget होता भी क्या है. What is budget? Why it is needed?
Great. The problem with basic questions is sometimes we so-called experts struggle to answer them. And Varinder, you always do this to me. You ask a basic question and you make me start thinking here.
Maybe, sir.
So basically a budget for the government, there are plenty of expenditures which have to be incurred by the government. And there is a lot of investments the government has to do, whether it is in roads, whether it is in schools. Abhi COVID chal raha hai, so you have to invest in vaccines, you have to invest in medical facilities. So there are plenty of expenditures, including to, for instance, our defense staff, including to our bureaucrats, including to our pensions of the people who have retired, education ke liye, healthcare ke liye, all these expenditures and investments, which the government has to take care of, right? Which you and I cannot take care of, but the government has to take care of. Now, how does the government fund for all this? उनकी भी आमदनी होती है, so they also have taxes which come to them. They also earn it, like you and I earn interest and dividend. They also have, they own things like ONGC and they own REC and PFC. They own banks, they own the RBI. So unse bhi unko dividend milta hai. So they also have an income. They use that income for the expenditures that we talked about, which is, both for salaries, pensions, subsidies, etc., and for investments. Future ke liye laga hua hai na? So in many ways, Varinder, it's like a normal household. How do you manage your expenses and how do you manage your income, right?
Sorry, so ye beech mein, like again, I'll try to be illiterate in this subject, okay? And I'll ask all those stupid questions to you.
Sure.
So it's always said on media that budget mein 2-5-10% ka khel reh gaya abhi. 80-90% it's out of the budget, and it's the government or the FM does not have to wait for the budget to announce all these so-called surprises if they have to. So is this really meaningful? And second, states, we're talking about the center budget, right? States budget is different, timing is different, and state budget कोई बात ही नहीं करता. जो मेरे ख्याल में बहुत ज्यादा जरूरी है, पर उसकी कोई बात नहीं करता. हम सेंटर की बात करते हैं. तो ये दो चीजें थोड़ा सा समझा दीजिए सर.
No, and both are excellent points, Varinder. So you're actually right in both the points. First point, a lot of the expenditures the government incurs are frankly not controllable beyond a point. Exactly. Like salaries to dena hi padega, your pensions to dena hi padega, right? Defense ke liye basic to dena hi padega. So lot of expenses are absolutely static. Now, there are some where they have some discretion, but again, the discretion is theoretical. For instance, food subsidy or fertilizer subsidy. Now, theoretically, you and I can argue and say isko kam kar sakte hain, but we know that politically it's very difficult to reduce these things. For instance, during COVID, you actually had that program where 900 million people, 90 crore people were given grains free. Effectively, which was required. During that time, there was hardship, so people had to be given. So obviously that cost of that is incurred by the government. So subsidies also, in theory, you can reduce, but it's very difficult to control. But there is certain elements, Varinder, which the government can absolutely control. For instance, specifically when it comes to investments, Now, these are, so about 6 lakh crores, and I'm going to throw some numbers here, apologies for that, but about 6 lakh crores, 5.5 lakh crores, let's call it 6 lakh crores, is what is called capital expenditure of the central government. These are things which go into investments, into new schools, into hospitals, AIMS, into new defense equipment, into roads, into, so a lot of infrastructure investments go in. Now, you and I both know that eventually we need these infrastructure investments, whether it is in education, healthcare, nutrition, or in hard things like power supply, roads, ports, ESG ka zamana hai, so ESG pollution kam karne ke liye investments. These are extremely important to create jobs, to create an investment cycle. You understand stocks far further than I do, but companies need these investments for them to invest themselves and then create jobs and opportunities in the economy. So there are big chunks of the expenditure which are within the control of the government, and they can decide. In fact, what this government did last year was it actually increased the amount of capital expenditure by a big number, 25% or so year on year. And they tried to reduce this uncontrollable things like salaries, pensions, etc., which anyway, beyond a point, you cannot control. And you can argue it's not very remunerative as well. On the second point state, again, very good point, Varinder. Actually, people don't realize this. The total expenditure of states, both on revenue expenditure and on capital expenditure, actually is higher than that of the center. So cumulatively, all the states put together spend more than the central government does. Wow. Now, you're absolutely right. We spend enough and more time on this 1st of February on the central budget. We don't spend time on the state budgets. Actually, the state budgets are more important in terms of sheer size. Yes, and right. In things like education, healthcare, etc., it's the states which spend more than the center. Exactly. So clearly, those are important things. And by the way, Jaise, you have lots of ghaplas in the central budget as well. There are lots of ghaplas in the state budgets as well, which people don't notice. So you're absolutely right. Both are equally important. And especially states, I would argue, are more important.
So, sir, because you said you'll throw a lot of numbers, so I have just tried to put these summary points. You may see, you're able to see the screen, right?
I'm able to see the screen.
So this is FY22 budget estimate, right? BE.
Right.
So in 2022, we have taken Jeffrey's estimate, what they are projecting that 22, what we will end with.
Right.
So if you can explain this small chart, आपको तो दिल से याद होगा, समझ गए होंगे, to our audience, कि इसमें capital क्या होता है, revenue क्या, जैसे आपने, you mentioned about capital expenditure of 5.5-6 lakh crore, right?
That's right.
So if you can explain कि this is the income and expenditure, जो आपने बोला, और नीचे पर वो physical deficit आ जाता है.
Right. So I'll give you very quickly, and thanks for putting up this chart. I was also going through the numbers when you were speaking. Very quickly, ये जो net tax receipts है, this is the total collection of taxes which comes about, and this is the share of the center. So पहले जो line दिख रहा है आपको, that's a gross tax revenue. By the way, the center is supposed to give on 41% of that gross tax revenue to the states. So एक finance commission करके एक होता है that has decided कि boss 41% आप states को दे दो, ठीक है ना? You're left with 59%. So what you see therefore coming to the center is 59%. Typically, that's supposed to be the rule. बहुत different होता है, वो अलग बात है. So net tax receipts at the central level was budgeted to be 15.5 lakh crores. ठीक है ना? ये lakh crore थोड़ा बड़ा हो जाता है number. If you want to think of it as a household, you can think of it as just lakhs and forget the crore. Now, this non-tax receipts is exactly what we discussed earlier, Varinder, which is things like dividend, things like interest income coming from, and then all the PSUs which the government owns, your SAIL, your REC, PFC, your banks, public sector banks, they all paid RBI, they all paid dividend to the government, and interest income also comes. That's that 2.5 lakh crore. So it's not taxes, but it is dividend and interest income coming from the state-owned enterprises. The last one, the disinvestments and loan recovery, it's largely disinvestments. 1.75 lakh crores is the disinvestment number. What was that? This was supposed to be the amount that the government raises by selling Air India, by doing an IPO of LIC, BPCL, Concor, wo sab karke, you're supposed to raise 1.75 lakh crores. This was the budget. So close to about 20 lakh crores was the budget. Revenue expenditure is what we discussed, which is the basic expenditure, which you can argue is not that productive, things like salaries, pensions, defense, basic, expenditure, etc. Subsidies comes in that. So food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, oil subsidy, if any, all of that comes under that. Capital expenditure, you have some amount of discretion on how you invest. By the way, last year, that number was something like 4.5 lakh crores.
Yes.
They actually increased that number by a substantial number over this one year. Now, if you come back to that earlier part that you were showing me, there is good news and there's bad news on this budget numbers. Okay. First good news, Varinder, is actually after a long time, the government is earning far more taxes than it budgeted.
Exactly. Also, if you allow me,
sure.
So this is the data what we collated or my team collated. Okay. So this is the gross tax collection job.
Correct.
So from 17 to 21, we were almost flat.
Right.
And now there's an uptake of 30% on a low base, of course, because 2021 was a very bad year.
That's right. I have a different estimate for 2022 end, but that doesn't matter. Okay. So the broad point is exactly right, which is gross tax collections have gone up dramatically. As of November, for which we are actually, as of December, we have November data for which we have data available. It's up by something like 30% over last year. As you rightly mentioned, actually 30% over pre-COVID year, 2 years ago. So it's gone up quite dramatically, which is great news. And the reason behind that, Varinder, is there is formalization happening in the economy. You know this better than I do. The first half corporate results were spectacular, right? Profits were up, 4,000 companies that CMI tracks and Economic Times tracks. The total profits were up by something like 150%, right? Dramatic numbers, right? So despite the fact that actually tax rates have been cut over the last 2 years, if you remember September 2019, tax rates were cut. Despite that, corporate tax rates have gone up dramatically in the last 2 years. Okay, it's gone up something like 30%. Income tax has gone up something like 30%. So it's been a dramatic improvement because of formalization. And what does this formalization mean? So one metric, Varinder, is how much of retail payments, your payments for buying stuff, selling stuff, including assets, shares and bonds and all of that, how much of that money is going through formal payments, which is through checks or going through NEFT, RTGS, IMPS, UPI, as opposed to going in cash. So the percentage of volumes going through formal channels, check and RTGS and NEFT, UPI, etc., has gone up dramatically since demonetization. So pre-demonetization, that ratio was about 150%. Today, it's about 220%. So clearly, there's been a big shift where all of us are using formal channels to pay rather than informal channels. Now, when that happens, your tax collections also go up because more and more transactions are coming within the ambit of the tax net. People can see that, right? Yes. So it's great news on that front. So this is genuinely good stuff, which this year we have demonstrated. Despite the Delta wave was there April to June and all that, we are actually seeing tax collections look very good. Now, by the way, some of this tax increase is also because of the tax on petrol and diesel, right? Yes. So uska bahut bada benefit mila hai central government ko. They did not cut the tax rate at all despite oil prices going up. They then cut the tax rate, excise duty, if you remember, in November. 10 rupees for petrol and 5 rupees for diesel, right? Thereafter, the tax corrections will come down on that front. Which is why I don't think we will see the number that you put up as
So I think nevertheless 17.5, right?
Nevertheless, instead of this, what had been projected, I think we will still see 20% growth over 2 years ago, which is a fantastic number. I think it's a very, very good number. And this 15.5 lakh crores that you had put as the central government tax might actually go up to 17.5 lakh crores. So you might actually see a 2 lakh crore increase. So 15.45 jo likha aapne. The government might end up with something like 17.5 lakh crores. Likewise, on this non-tax revenue, 2.4 lakh crores jo likha hai wahan pe, there the RBI dividend has been much higher than budgeted. So RBI, instead of paying 50,000 crores odd, has paid almost 1 lakh crore. So dono mila ke 2.5 lakh crores is your, you're getting a kind of a bonanza on that front. Yeah. So instead of getting 17.88 or jo bhi tha aapka number close to 18, you're actually going to get something like 20 and a half as the total collection. So that's the great news. Just make bad news be here. The next line, disinvestments looking very, very tough. Right? I don't know if LIC will happen or not. Even if LIC happens, you might not get 1.75 lakh crores. You might fall short by take a pick, 75,000 crores, 80,000 crores, maybe even 1 lakh crore, you might fall short. So while taxes and dividend have gone up by 2.5 lakh crores, your disinvestment is down by 1 lakh crore. So you still are left with 1.5 lakh crore more. This, Varinder, is great news because we are getting more collections than budgeted at the central government after a long, long time. Har ek saal, we were always ending up much lower than what we had budgeted. This year, kudos to the government. They've budgeted very conservatively and they're actually getting much more than they expected and they budgeted. So it is good news there.
Sir, I have a basic question.
Hanji, bolo.
Sorry, sir, I keep on hearing about the budget for the last 15 years. Okay? कभी हमें डर लगता है कि हमारा फिजिकल डेफिसिट 10% पहुंच जाएगा. अभी now we are in control 6.5%, right? LIC अभी नहीं होगा तो अगले साल हो जाएगा, right? और blah blah blah, many other disinvestments हो जाएगा. I really want to know from your experience कि now when we're talking about this manufacturing, inclusion, formalization of economy, and again, the numbers, whatever numbers, I think I have read 5-6 reports, badi sab local brokers and all foreign brokers पढ़ी हैं, तो सबका 15-16 लाख करोड़ के आसपास का physical deficit आता है. Everyone is 6.5%. Help me to understand, sir, कि what is a big change as per you which is happening in this country, if it is happening or not? Because every time I am always suspicious of कि budget में यार कुछ भी कर देंगे, number का क्या पता चलेगा, 2 दिन बात करेंगे, 1 साल भूल जाएंगे, फिर कुछ होगा तो ठीक है, but we are seeing, I am seeing changes across sectors happening. The texture of manufacturing sector at least is changing in this country. Inclusion जैसे आपने बोला वो हो रहा है. आपके हिसाब से वो बड़ा चीज क्या हो रहा है सर इंडिया में?
तो Varinder, let's break this up into 2 parts. एक जो आप बोल रहे हो इंडिया में जो हो रहा है, equality, jobs वगैरह, that's the real economy. That is the nuts and bolt. Finally, that's the one that has to fire. नौकरियां बन रही हैं, output हो रहा है कि नहीं? That is the big question. The second part is the financial economy. ये आपका जो fiscal deficit वगैरह जो हम लोग people like idiots like me who keep talking about it. This is the financial economy side, which frankly is like a lubricant or supposed to be like a lubricant for the real economy. By itself, it is useless. Fiscal deficit is useless. Your monetary policy is useless unless it translates into jobs and output on the ground. Okay? Now and by the way, you can have good things like jobs and output. You can also have bad things like inflation coming out because of bad financial policy. So when you say this fiscal deficit 15 lakh crore last year and next year will probably be 16 lakh crore. So you're absolutely right. It is in that ballpark. What does that mean? Okay, now we talked about household income and we talked about spending. So let's go through the numbers a little bit again. Very broadly, Varinder, the total income coming through taxes is about 19.5 lakh crores. Okay. So let's call it 20 lakh crores. Yeah, let's make it round. 20 lakh crores is the income coming from taxes. 1 lakh crore, let's assume, is coming from your disinvestment. So dono milake 22 lakh crores. Now think of it as a household. You're earning 18 lakhs of salary, 2 lakhs of actually let's say 3 lakhs. So 3 lakhs of dividend and then on your investment. So 18 plus 321 plus 1 lakh, you're selling some assets. You're selling your mother's gold earrings. Okay. So total, you've earned 22 lakh rupees. Now, how do you spend that money? Normal household will say, boss, agar 23 meri amdani hai, to mera kharcha should be less than 23. And within that 23, I have to save also. So let's say spend 15 lakhs and I save 8 lakhs for my future, for my child's education, for a new business, jo bhi ho, Governments do not operate that way. So what we call the kharcha pani, the normal, which you were kept at 15, 16 lakhs if you're earning 22 lakhs. In the case of the government actually spends something like 31 lakh crores. So while it's only earning 21 lakhs through earnings and 1 lakh by selling assets, it's actually spending 31 lakh crores in revenue, which is salaries, pensions, subsidies, sab mila ke, it's paying that much. On top of it, it is investing something like 6 lakh or 5.5 lakh, let's call it 6 lakh crores. So total expenditure is 37 lakh crores against your income of 32 lakh crores. That's how the fiscal deficit comes. Now, for people like you and me, when we think about it, we say, "Ye kya bakwas hai? How can you spend more than what you earn?" And by the way, it's a very controversial topic even for economists. Can you really keep on spending like this with money that you don't have? Okay. Now, the point is the following. Governments are not like households because government also has the authority to create money. So they are the people who eventually print the currency, and therefore repaying debt for them is not a problem. If they are borrowing in rupees, they can always repay it. Koi tension nahi hai. So 15 lakh crore kahan se aa raha hai? They borrow from people. Whom do they borrow from? They borrow from banks, they borrow from insurance companies, they borrow from pension funds, they borrow from RBI. Sab mila ke, that's how the fiscal deficit is funded. Now, two things happen by this spending. One, the good part that you mentioned, Varinder. If you're spending this money into productive investments, you're creating roads, you're creating power capacity, you're creating solar plants, you're creating ports. Agar ye sab kar rahe ho, and then your Aatmanirbhar Bharat takes off, PLI takes, you're putting money in PLI as well. So PLI takes off. Then you create jobs and output. You create exports. And guess what? When all that happens, then the country's income goes up and they pay you more taxes. So if you invest in the right way, and that helps create fresh jobs and output, all these people who start creating value, they earn money, they spend money, they pay you taxes, and that helps you pay your fiscal deficit down over time. Koi tension nahi. That's the good part. Supposing you don't create jobs, supposing you're only sending money through, I'm sorry to use that phrase, but let's say you're putting in Narega. There is nothing, no output created. You're only giving the money in the hands of people, right? Then this 15 lakh crore jo deficit hua hai, you've effectively created that money and given it in the hands of people. Fiscal deficit funded by banks and RBI effectively creates money. The problem, Varinder, is if you're creating money without output, that will lead to inflation. This is happening globally. This is happening in India. So this is extremely critical. One of the routes through which money is created in an economy is through this fiscal deficit. There are two other routes. We'll not go into that, but this is one big route. So it is very, very, you're absolutely right. Tum 2 din ke liye we'll talk about fiscal deficit and then bhul jayenge. But iski effect jo hai, it will be felt on both these counts. First, are you spurring investments, jobs, output, which is the good thing? If you're not doing that, you will risk creating inflation and too much money chasing too few goods, and therefore creating inflation. In the country, Varinder, just to summarize, at the moment, unfortunately, we are not creating enough jobs and output. Now, there is inflation. There are lots of reasons for inflation, but one of the reasons for inflation is money has been created without adequate increase in jobs and output. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. I enjoy hearing you, sir. So मेरा क्वेश्चन वही रहता है सर कि बार-बार के जो आपने बहुत अच्छे से समझाया 22 minus 36, 22 income, 36 expenditure,
47, yeah, जो भी हो, around that. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, it's about 15. The fiscal deficit is 15. So either 21 and 36 or.
ठीक है. 21.
Sorry, I'm a professor. I like numbers. So
21 and a half, 36.2 to be
correct.
15 is the fiscal deficit. हमारे देश में सर इंटरेस्ट जो है जो हम गवर्नमेंट पे करती है, that is more than the corporate taxes or income taxes or GST.
That's right.
So मैं बार-बार ये सोचता हूँ कि अगर आप FM होते and you have to bridge this 15 lakh crore, आप एक साल तो चलो LIC को बेच दो, तो 1 लाख करोड़ एक साल के लिए हो गया, 1.5 लाख करोड़ डाइवेस्टमेंट से आ गया, वो मार्च 2022 में आया या 23 में आया, that is another thing. The formalization of economy, which is happening good, after a long time, and now we are seeing increase in taxes, but it takes time, right? बाकी साल 2 साल 3 साल लगेगा, but again आपका जो भी tax receipt है, that is going to not jump from say 17.5 lakh crore to 25 lakh crore or 22 lakh crore in next 2-3 years. It'll take time. Okay, it's a slow process. 15-20% growth every year. So we have to live with the fiscal deficit, right? Like what is right? 9% भी हमने fiscal deficit पे गए थे, हम 6% की बात भी कर रहे हैं, फिर हम खुश हो जाएंगे अगर FM बोल दे कि 5% fiscal deficit आ जाएगा because मेरा GDP बढ़ जाएगा. एक और तरीका बहुत अच्छा है sir. So we are not discussing about that, but मेरे ख्याल में the base effect can come into picture. 260 लाख करोड़ आ गया, तो आपका वो 15 डिवाइडेड बाय 260 आपका 5% हो जाएगा. फिर हम मीडिया में बोलेंगे अरे वाह वाह कितना अच्छा हो गया, सारा कुछ हो गया, देखो 6.5 से 5% आ गया. So I am just trying to, how can we bite the bullet, or there is no way we can do that?
No, there is absolutely a way we can do that, Varinder. I'm glad you asked these very nice questions. Think of yourself as a business person who can borrow money to spend. Okay? You can spend either on kharcha pani or you can invest on various new businesses, etc. When will a businessman borrow? When he or she is convinced that the return that you will get on your investment is going to be higher than the rate at which you're borrowing, you no problem in borrowing. So if your business is growing at 14% and you can borrow at 7% interest rate, why will you not borrow? Of course you will borrow and you will make a lot of money. India's notion, so you know this, you mentioned 262 lakh crores, 260 lakh crores odd, which will be the GDP. So for this year, GDP will end, that's what the NSO says, about 232 lakh crores.
Exactly.
Which is 17% higher than last year, 17 point something percent higher, 17.4% or something, right? So if your country's total output has grown by 17% in notional terms, in nominal terms, it includes inflation also, but it's grown by 17%. If you're borrowing money at 6 or 7%, which is what the GOI rates are going at right now, and your tax can grow at the same rate as your GDP, which is 17%, why won't you do it? I can borrow this money, I can invest it, and then help get it repaid by the income coming back. Okay, but the critical part, Varinder, is twofold. One is, of course, that the growth has to be there. So whatever you're spending money in has to be translating into jobs and output, which is what I'll keep coming back to. That's the first part. Second part is, see, 232 lakh crores jo growth hua hai from 197 last year, a lot of it is inflation. The real growth is barely some 9 odd percent. The balance 8% is inflation as per NSO itself. So if you're only creating value in terms of inflation, that's bad for everybody, especially at a time when everybody, the bottom of the pyramid is struggling, right? So is fiscal deficit bad? No. If you can borrow that money and invest it into areas which create jobs and output, no problem at all. So, I talked about fiscal deficit creating money.
It's like a debt equity of a company, right?
Absolutely right. So you talked, and I'm glad you talked about debt equity. So here is another statistic. I mentioned that government spending creates money. The fiscal deficit creates money. The other thing which creates money, it's private credit. So when companies take loans, they take loan from the bank. The bank gives the credit, that creates money. So every loan given out creates a deposit, creates a money. Okay? Now, the total loans given out in this country is about 110 lakh crores, which is roughly 50% of GDP. Mota mota. Okay? You know what that number is for China? For China, that number is 250% of GDP. So if their GDP is $14 trillion, the total loans outstanding from banks is more than $30 trillion. So, imagine the amount of money they have. Normally, you would have said, my God, itna paisa tumne create kiya hai by giving so much of loans. But here is what China managed. They created this money, but they used that money to create jobs and output. So when you give all that money, you create demand. But you made supply even higher than that demand. So much so that you're not only supplying to your people, you're supplying to the whole world. You become the manufacturing capital of the world.
So ROC should be higher than the COC, cost of capital.
Exactly right. So if your supply side is creating more output and jobs than the demand you're creating by printing money, please print money. koi tension. So people say printing money is bad. It's not bad as long as what you're putting that money to use is to create output and therefore jobs higher than the demand created. That is the path to success. That is the path to growth. You know? So, but I will go back to what I said, Varinder. These are two separate things. Finance Minister, Ma'am Nirmala Sitharaman, cannot necessarily solve for the real economy. She can set aside the resources for capital investments. We've got a national infrastructure plan, 111 crores over the next 5 years, 111 lakh crores, sorry, over the next 5 years. Now there is a path to fund that also, national monetization plan. So the government has the right ideas in terms of PLI to create jobs, NIP to create infrastructure to create those jobs. It has talked about Aatmanirbhar Bharat. It has changed labor laws. It has brought down tax rates. So it is trying to do all this to create jobs and output. After all this, if we still don't create jobs and output, we are going to be in trouble. We are creating so much of money, but if you don't create output and jobs, एक तो people दुखी रहेंगे कि मुझे नौकरी नहीं है मेरे पास, social issues रहेगा, ऊपर से you'll also create inflation. So I'm going to digress a bit, Varinder. This is for the last 15-20 years, this has been our biggest problem in India. You know, I'm an armchair professor, so I can make all these sweeping statements. So do you know that over the last 6 years, as per CMI, the total number of jobs in the economy has remained static at 40 crores over the last 6 years. Now, you and I both know that we are supposed to have 1.2 crore jobs created every year because that's the number of young people coming out into the job force. But as per CMI, there's been no change. On top of it, agriculture jobs has gone up by 1.5 crores. You know what that means? It's disguised unemployment. Why would agriculture go up? Agriculture is supposed to be now more than 40% of the workforce. That doesn't make sense at all. That's disguised unemployment. So services and manufacturing put together, we've lost 1.5 crore jobs. Within that, manufacturing, we've lost 3 crore jobs. Services, we've made 1.5 crore jobs. So net, we have not created jobs in this country. I'll give you another couple of statistics, Varinder. In 2005, the total number of people, employment to population ratio, how many people were employed compared to the population above 18 years? That ratio was 55% in India. Today, that ratio is 43%. Within women, the participation rate as per official statistics is 20%, as per CMI is below 10%. The GDP of the country contributed by women is 17% in this country. And by the way, I told you employment population 43%. You know what it is for Vietnam? It is 75%. 75% of the adult population in Vietnam is working.
But sir, these numbers are changing in the last 1 year, right? Like since the manufacturing, Aatmanirbhar, PLI things are there. Like at least in the manufacturing space, we are seeing a lot of registrations by companies happening in India, domestic, global, and everything. I'm just saying that ये जो निर्मला सीतारमन जी ने ये चेंज किया 2019 में मेरे ख्याल में जो किया कॉर्पोरेट टैक्स काटा उसके बाद ये चीजें बदली है ना इंडिया में.
So इसके 2-3 आंसर हैं वरिंदर. First is अभी कोविड चल रहा है. It is unfair to expect that during the time of COVID you will see dramatic increases in improvement in jobs. That's the first part. Second part is Aatmanirbhar Bharat has just come. PLI has just been launched. It will take at least 1 or 2 years for it to start showing some meaningful results. Okay. And as I said, if PLI works, it's great because while it is for the big companies, largely it's also for SMEs, but it will create a whole ecosystem. If you start creating smartphones in India, the ecosystem, then they will have SMEs, they will have MSMEs, they will become the supply chain, forward integration, backward integration, and you will create more and more jobs, which is what, by the way, China did. Create the big ones and then put MSMEs around it. So that will also happen. But some of this will take time. That's the second part. Third part, there has actually been job creation in some areas. We know it. Aapko pata hai, try hiring an IT person today. Koi milta nahi hai. There's absolutely there's a complete shortage of people in IT. Formal jobs, do you know, for instance, I talked about this 4,000 companies where your profits have gone up by 150%. Their salary payouts have increased by something like 15-16% over the last 2 years. And all happened this year. So actually in the formal sector, jobs are available. The formal sector is doing well. and the salaries are going up. In some cases, there is a desperate shortage of skilled people. But the problems, Varinder, is I told you 40 crore people is the workforce. Only 6 crore people are in the formal workforce. And there's a definition for formal workforce. Do you have employment guarantee? Do you have a pension fund? Do you have some social safety net? That's only 6 crore, which is 40% of the 15% of the workforce. 85% of your workforce is in the informal sector. Bulk of them are farmers. But even if you remove that, about 40% are in the informal sector. They're in MSMEs, they're in the mom and pop shows, they're the thelawalas, they are the restaurant mein jo kaam karta hai wo.
But यही तो चीज मोदी जी करना चाहते हैं. I'm taking the liberty of debating with you. Because I always, at least since last 3 years, since we started investing in chemicals, in textiles, in sugar, some of these sectors where मेरे ख्याल में the only thing what Modi ji or they want is that हमारे पास पैसा नहीं है, तो हमें डॉलर देना ही नहीं है. तो import substitution चाहिए, जो भी हो इंडिया में हो. Right. So the entire framework of the decision making body in different sectors, because they saw what happened with IT, pharma, auto, chemicals, textiles is a big, autos now, hopefully they do something. We don't have money to pay any dollars.
Yeah.
And we have to produce everything in India. Is that right?
The strategy sounds absolutely right. There are some people who argue that we should open up our markets, don't increase custom duties. That's a theoretical concept. The strategy is absolutely right. So here is the number. We have the trade data for 11 months of the 2021. So up to November, we have the trade data. Do you know that our trade deficit with China for the 11 months up to November is now 57 point something billion dollars. We are going to cross $60 billion of trade deficit with China in 2021. It is a record high. Okay. And where are the imports happening? All the items you mentioned: chemicals, organic, inorganic, miscellaneous, plastics, electronics, machinery. All of that we are importing from China. Now, to be fair, prices have gone up. So therefore, the value of the imports have gone up. But volume has also gone up. So reality, and by the way, our exports also have gone up. And you know what we export to China? We export iron ore, we export cotton, we export aluminium, we export raw materials, and we import finished products. It's almost like a colonial dispensation. Now, the idea is absolutely right that we have to replace this. Why? So I was speaking to a weighing machine maker a few weeks back. He used to employ 100 people in Nashik to create weighing machines. Now you and I have become very conscious of weight, so we put a weighing machine, simple weighing machine at the house, right? He stopped that company. He now imports that from Malaysia, and his top line has grown because he can import lots and lots and lots, and he only has 10 people in sales. He used to have 100 people in the factory earlier, and he's very happy. But can you see the tragedy for India? This is, we had a poorer country, we have poorer people, we have people wanting jobs, and we are exporting those jobs to Malaysia of all people. Now, the idea is right. So we have to get Aatmanirbhar Bharat. We have to get PLI. Why can't we make phones ourselves? Why can't we make electric vehicles ourselves? Why can't we make batteries ourselves? Why can't we make air conditioner parts ourselves?
This is a big change which could happen in India from an agricultural economy to a manufacturing economy, because this is what, उसी पैसा आएगा सर. नहीं तो आप हर साल आप और मैं बात करते रहेंगे 15 लाख करोड़ डेफिसिट, 12 लाख करोड़ डेफिसिट, 13 लाख करोड़ डेफिसिट. Like I ask you seriously, अगर आप FM होते तो आप पैसा कहाँ से लेके आते? Like 15 लाख
कमी नहीं है वरिंदर, पैसों की कमी नहीं है. मैं सही में बता रहा हूँ. In India there is never a problem of money. Even in you ask a government finance secretary, he will tell you पैसों की कमी नहीं है. I'll give you another. So we are very honest people. You have to tell China सब कुछ hide करता है. Don't believe anything which comes out from China. But we are genuinely good, honest people. So you know what? The central government comes out with a report every month tracking the status of something like 1,680 projects. Okay, वो actual website में आता है. So they have tracked this. You know what the results show? And this is for November data. 1,680 में से only 300 projects roughly are going on time. 800 में उनको पता ही नहीं है whether it's on time or not because they don't have the proper data. About 550 जो बचे कुचे हैं, उसमें the delay is between 3 to 4 years on each project average, and the cost is up by 25 to 26%. And this is not because of COVID. This was the situation even before COVID. Okay. Now this is central government. Central government, you and I both know the amount of tracking happening there is amazing. Every senior officer is tracking every single large project. You know what the reasons given in the report for the delays are? Land acquisition, labor issues, financial closure nahi hai, environmental clearances nahi hai, litigation chal raha hai land pe. Okay, same old issues again and again and again.
Every single year. So
I come back to the real economy. Eventually, what do we need? We have to create jobs in this country through this investment. The ideas are absolutely right. NIP is right. PLI is right. Aatmanirbhar Bharat is right. Everything is right. First, we have to solve for the labor issues. Second, we have to solve or the labor law issues. Now, labor laws were passed in 2020 September. They have not yet been notified. Only 7 states have notified this. Center ne bhi notify nahi kiya hai. It's a tough political call. I mean, you and I can talk about this theoretically, but for a politician to actually pass this, it's not easy, right? That's the first part. Second part on land. Land acquisition, you know, remember 2015, mein Modi ji was trying to push through the land. In fact, Jaitley ji was trying to push through the land reform, which eventually got shelved, right? And they said states ko karne do. Do you know, Varinder, and it's not all land, but you know, there are 45 million, so 4.5 crore cases outstanding in this country. So CJ Ramana, the Chief Justice Ramana, he gave a speech a few days back where he said, even if not a single case gets added from now on, it will take 360 years to clear this backlog of 4.5 crore cases. You've seen what is happening with Amazon Future and all that. You understand those things better than I do. Every single case gets litigated, right? So look, it is essentially you have to clean up things like this, ease of doing investments. Labor laws ko aasan karo.
Budget is more for softer issues and important issues, not softer issues, but important issues like these, which is not numbers.
Exactly right. I think you hit the nail on the head. Numbers are not, if you ask China ke budget numbers kya hai, nobody knows and nobody even bothers because there they've got the real economy right. So for us as well, the softer issues, are you making your economy more efficient? Are you improving land acquisition laws? Are you making the labor laws more amenable both for labor and for the people putting in the capital? Are you improving this ease of contract enforcement and litigation in the country? Now, to be fair, they are trying.
Yes, yeah.
The intent is absolutely there, but ours is a complicated country. It is never so. While everything is right, Aatmanirbhar Bharat is right, PLI is right, your NIP is right, and NMP is right, but implementing all this and executing all this, Varinder, is very, very tough in this country.
Right? I agree with that, sir. But personally, I think change is happening. You know, when I talk to like big manufacturing companies, industrial companies, they are putting money after a long, long time. They have sat aside. They have never invested. I think after a period of 6-7 years, they are now investing. They're talking about big manufacturing wave which is coming up. So, which is what what is seen from the biggest companies. Like I have never seen Mr. Naik being so aggressive. Which wo kabhi hote nahi the. SKF hua.
I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that. So I think all the policies are in the right place. The intent is very, very strong. So, for instance, can you imagine Prime Minister Modi stood up in Parliament and said the government has no business being in business. We have to get out of lots of businesses. Can you imagine in a socialistic country like ours, any Prime Minister ever making this speech, forget anywhere else, in Parliament of all places, right? So I think the intent is absolutely right. But as I said, the seeing will be believing. We have to see how it works out. Now, on Mr. Naik, etc., you're absolutely right. Formal sector is doing incredibly well. And I'm saying that, I mean, the numbers are looking, the fact that taxes have gone up, GST collections are going up, they look at the results of the companies, they're looking fantastic, and salaries are going up, everything is fantastic. The problem is the overall numbers, and this is not just CMI, even the periodic labor force survey, which is done by the government, shows that overall numbers are still struggling. Now, to be fair, through COVID, it's very, very tough to show dramatic improvement in employment, etc. But hopefully it will happen. And one more quick thing, Varinder. See, the reason why I get angsty, for instance, 40 crores we are static for the last 6 years, because our potential is so incredibly high. So I have, Varinder, worked in 12 countries. Okay, not been there for a long time, but I've worked in 12 markets. I've traded in 12 markets. I have not seen, this includes Singapore, this includes Malaysia, this includes Vietnam, this includes Bangladesh, this includes Thailand, bunch of countries, different types of countries. I have not seen a single country which has the promise that India has. The people here are so dynamic. The angst is so much. The aspiration is so much.
Yes.
You know that Indians, given the opportunity, will do a lot, right? So the disappointment is our potential itna upar hai, and we tend to underperform that potential. Now, despite all this, in the last 30 years, so you know this per capita income, right? What is the average income of every Indian? It has grown by 6% per annum in dollar terms for the last 30 years. And in between, we have cried so much. Government bakwas hai, kuch nahi ho raha hai, we are not doing this, we are not doing that, corruption hai, ye wo. End of the day, bottom line, we still grow. So that confidence is there. We might underperform, but we will still grow. We have good people. वो तो होगा ही.
वो आदत है सर Indians की.
बिल्कुल. And we will do well. We are doing well. We will do well. By the way, the same 30 years, China's income has grown by 12% per annum. So their compounding has been far, far higher than us. But nevertheless, 6% is not a small number. It's a good number. Now, if all these things work out, your PLI, your NIP, your essentially getting labor laws cleaned up, essentially getting the land acquisition cleaned up, your ease of doing investments, your contract enforcements, policy stability, financing, environmental issues. If we clean up all this 6% over the next 30 years.
Sir, मैं आपको बोलूं, इंडिया के पास और कोई तरीका है ही नहीं है. This is the only way, because Modi ji understands this. You and me and everyone understands this is the only way. We can't grow at the numbers what you say what China is doing, being an agricultural economy. Okay, this is the only thing they know that they have to do, because पैसा मेरे पास नहीं है कि दूसरों को पैसा बोलूंगा कि घर पे आके लगाओ. You have to invite someone to put money into the economy.
Right.
And that is why in the last 2-3 years, Apple, Google, Amazon, किसी का भी नाम लो sir, everyone is coming to India and investing now.
Absolutely.
So
Varinder, I guess we're saying the same thing in many ways. One area where foreigners don't understand how strong we are, or underestimate how strong we are, is actually on our digital and our India stack and the tech.
Yeah.
Abhi unicorns dekhe last year. I think the potential is amazing. So our digital infrastructure, right from Aadhaar to now to UPI to the NCPI, all APCI, all that they're doing, fantastic stuff. Okay, so that part we will do extremely well. Usme koi problem nahi hai. You know where we've missed up, Varinda, which is what I guess PLI tries to address. It is in the manufacturing side.
Exactly.
A lot of people say that it doesn't matter, we can do services. No, I don't agree. We need everything. Now, the point is, why is it that we have to import chemicals? Why do you have to import plastic?
Gold and oil, sir, gold. Because अभी भी पागल हो गए हम gold import करते.
बिल्कुल यार, बिल्कुल. So we end up essentially importing things for consumption.
Exactly.
And it's not just gold and oil. It's also electronics. It's also plastics. It's also chemicals. It's fertilizers, machinery. Yeah, air condition ke 40-50% parts are made outside, right? They're all imported. Now, that shift towards manufacturing in India and using an MSME to create that infrastructure is absolutely required. You need that jobs. You don't want to spend money for silly things like this, and you want to create jobs in India. Now, which is why, if that happens, Varinder, our potential is amazingly high. So your point about agriculture economy, and we can't remain an agriculture economy, absolutely spot on. Point is, are we creating enough opportunities in manufacturing for people to shift out of agriculture?
So you and me are same, sir, about the manufacturing thing. Just to quote, आज नीलेश भाई का और पंकज सर का, पंकज टिब्रेवाल का बहुत अच्छा आर्टिकल आया था. So this is a very important point. They said that India's mobile manufacturing, the value has jumped 8 times, from 2013-14 till now. Last 8 साल में 8 times jump कर गई है. We are now the 3rd largest producer after US and South Korea. Globally. Because this is the kind of change which is happening, and big change which is happening. Sir, I'll take the last 5 minutes because I can talk to you on any topic. I like your energy. It's like contagious. So two things. One, if there are top 3 numbers you have to watch out for just for the sake of budget, because it's budget, so we have to talk numbers. ठीक है ना? Honestly, ठीक है. But 3 नंबर जो आपको लगता है वरिंदर, ये ध्यान रखना बस. ये सबसे जरूरी नंबर है. जैसे आपने 21.4 or 36.2 बोला, since you're a professor, so I have to be exact on the numbers. So 3 numbers आपको क्या लगता है कि वरिंदर ये जरूरी है देखने वाले?
Yeah, you're forcing me to think differently. So let me come out with some three things. First is, I would look at what is the government planning for asset sales, both this year as well as next year. So this year we know it's 1.75 lakh crores they're supposed to do. I want to know how much shortfall hoga, if at all. It looks like there will be a shortfall. How much will be the shortfall? Secondly, how much are you planning to do next year? And the reason that's important, Varinder, is remember what the finance minister promised last year, that she will privatize two public sector banks. She will privatize one insurance company. She will do an IPO for LIC, and she will do others, BPCL, Air India, vagara, vagara. Now, Air India ho raha hai, but the others are still stuck, right? The direction of that is important. Why is that important? And you know this better than I do. The PSU market cap has remained static over the last 8, 9, 10 years, right? We are not creating value there. We're not creating jobs there. Kuch nahi ho raha hai. So that trend towards what the Prime Minister said, which is government should get out of non-essential business, is absolutely right. I want to see, is the government still intent on doing that, asset sales and creating, not just creating space for investments, also creating efficiency. Chances are, if you give Air India to the Tatas, they will make it a lot more efficient and we'll create a lot more value, right? Now, why is that again important? After the farm laws were taken back, I'm worried, is it becoming a political problem? Privatization and things like labor law changes, is it becoming a political problem? I think the Prime Minister still has enough political capital to push through these reforms, but I would like to see. That's the first point. Second point, which is not necessarily numbers specific, but so you mentioned this 15 lakh crores. I think it will be 16 lakh crores of borrowing for the next year. The problem with this, Varinder, is that you see last couple of years, RBI has been buying bonds and has been forcing banks to buy bonds as well. And therefore we finance this deficit. Going forward, it will be tougher. Now, what we are hoping for is that India's debt gets included into global indices. So just as Indian equity is part of MSCI, and because Indian debt equity is part of MSCI, you have lots of global investors who put money into India, right? Even if it's a Japanese pension fund who doesn't know where India is on the map, they will still put money in India because it's part of the index. Indian debt is not part of global indices. So whatever is being held by foreigners is actually outside of index. And you know this better than I do. If it's not part of your benchmark, why would you invest? So I would want to see this 16 lakh crores ka jo shortfall or deficit hai, are they bargaining for index inclusion and therefore for big debt inflows to come in? So JP Morgan, for instance, says, and I think others like Standard have also said, if index inclusion happens, India can get $25 to $30 billion in the debt markets. To me, that can be a big change. We always talk about equity markets. We hardly talk about bond markets. It can be a big change to bond markets, both in terms of flows and, in terms of we need savings from outside. It will be a good way of getting savings to fund our. So 16 lakh crores, along with, are we doing tax changes to make index inclusion better? Okay. If you want to get a third number, remember 5.5 lakh crores was the capital investment for this year. I will want to see how much is being pushed up next year. I know it will be pushed up, but is it up by 15%? Is it up by 20%? So when we talked, Varinder, we said capital expenditure is good expenditure. So I'm hoping it is at least 6.5 lakh crores, and the higher the better. To me, if that number can be pushed up, it will tell us that this national infrastructure plan, etc., the government is serious about, and therefore those investments into the future will happen. I can tell you lots more numbers, but I'll stop there since you asked for 3. But effectively, it's like this. I think the numbers are fine. As you rightly said, numbers 19-20 kuch fark nahi padta hai. People like me will lose hair on analyzing it. Usse kuch fark nahi padta hai. The point is, money is there. Does it go into the real economy? And do all the good plans that we have, whether it's PLI, whether it's Aatmanirbhar Bharat, whether it's NIP, translate into more jobs and output over the next few years? Do we get that track?
Sir, if you were given a chance to ask one question or one wish to FM Madam Nirmala Sitharaman ji, क्या पूछेंगे आप? और क्या कहेंगे कि ये कीजिए आप? Do this for the betterment of the economy, betterment of India, like the passion, what you said, कि boss, इतनी काबिलियत है, but हम कुछ करते नहीं है. एक आपका ऐसा धुआंधार आइडिया कौन सा होगा?
So yeah, it's an unpopular idea, but mulla ki daud masjid tak. So my background is foreign exchange and bonds more than equity. I used to be a trader in those markets. So one question I have is, why is Varinderbansal, he's such an active person when it comes to equities? Why doesn't he get involved more in the bond markets? Okay. Why don't people like you and young, bright people like you who are managing investments, why don't you get a lot more active trading in bonds as well? I'll tell you the reason for that. The taxation in bonds, as you know, is very, very prohibitively high compared to equity, right? So you have 7 crore people now who have demat accounts are trading in equities. I can tell you that you and I both don't have corporate bonds in our portfolio. We might hold debt funds, but we don't have corporate bonds. You know why? If I own a corporate bond, 100 rupees, on which I'm earning interest of 7 rupees, and let's say I have it for 3 years, I earn total interest of 21 rupees, 7 plus 7 plus 7. On that 7, if I'm an HNI, I will pay 42% tax. Wow. So out of that 21 rupees, I will pay 8.5 rupees as tax. Okay. Now, if I put the same money through a debt fund rather than buying the bond myself, then the taxation is different. Unlike equities, equities is the same whether I hold the equity myself or through a fund. But in debt, if I hold through a fund, then I get inflation indexation, which means jitna bhi inflation hai, 5 plus 5 plus 5, 15, that is not taxed. So 21 mein se 15 is not taxed. Jo baki 6 hai, that is taxed at 20%, which is the capital gains tax after 3 years. Okay? Equity mein, everything goes as capital gains. Beyond 1 year, the taxation is 10%. So you and I have to have rocks in our head to trade in bonds when you're paying 41% tax or 42% tax, when you can trade in equities and pay capital gains of 10% beyond 1 year, or maybe even short-term capital gains is quite small comparatively. So what I would love is if we can remove this tax consideration, which is stopping people from trading in bonds. If I tell you that your bond capital gains also will be taxed the same way as equity, I can tell you that people like you, people like all the strong people who are there in the equity world will start taking an interest in bonds as well. If that goes up, you will have, and Indians are a trading mentality. If the bond market volumes go up, I can tell you that will be a huge force multiplier for funding infrastructure, for doing a lot of the things that we need to do, including the government.
This is the thing which low hanging fruit hota hai na, like you said, rocks on the head. Ki ye aisa kyun hai? Why is this way?
So when you find the answer, Vander, मेरे को बताना, मुझे पता नहीं है. Ever since I had a lot more hair on my head, I've been asking for this. By the way, people get it. So in fact, day before yesterday, we had a meeting with Niti Aayog where again we mentioned this and we said, listen, karao usko yaar. Now it's too late for this year. I don't know if it will happen or not. But ye definitely hona chahiye. So people who are willing to trade. So for instance, we know there are 12% bonds. Okay. Now, if there are people who are willing to take that risk, that I know I think this is a good corporate, I don't mind buying the equity, I don't mind buying the bond, why not allow them to trade? With the risk, allow them to trade, and don't let tax come in the way of them coming to trade.
True. ये आप जो बोल रहे हो ना सर कि 20-25% corporate taxes बढ़े, वो इसलिए बढ़े because आपने taxation कम कर दिया. आपने सोचा कि you need a wider network in order to people to give money, taxes, not कि हाँ भी taxes ज़्यादा कर दो फिर तो लोग पैसा कभी देंगे नहीं वो. So you have to increase that.
So on the entire system of corporate bonds and debt, I think there are lots of things that I'm hoping will happen eventually over time. For instance, LIC, pension funds, EPFO, वगैरह, they are restricted on how much they can put into which category and which rating of bond. Yeah, they are smart people. They have an investment committee. They have a board. Let them set their policies on how they manage their risk. Why should you say that only 10% you will put in AA and below? So there are lots of things we can do to grow the corporate bond market. If you have both markets firing, Varinder, both equity and corporate bonds, I think this country will benefit dramatically going forward.
Aapka wo point bhi bahut acha tha, sir. The India's debt should be included in MSCI, because that would be a very, very big thing. I remember Nilesh bhai also mentioning about this and pushing about this. But ek saal se sun rahe hain ki hoga.
Nilesh and I are, we sometimes disagree, but on this item we completely agree. So I'll give another statistic, Varinder. I think broadly 19-20 ka farak ho sakta hai. If I remember correctly, the numbers, FIIs hold 60% of the free market cap of Nifty. Okay. Yeah. And they hold about 20% of overall NSE market cap. Okay. Now, they also, the overseas FPIs hold less than 3% of government debt. Corporate bond to chhodi do, it's nothing, negligible number. Okay. So effectively, as a country, we have sold our equity to the FPIs, given them an ownership of 20% of our overall exchange, 60% of our main index to the FPIs, when we are not giving them any ownership of our debt. So it's like if it's like a promoter whose company is growing at 12-13%, who can borrow at 6%, but he refuses to borrow money, but only issues equity. Concept promoter aisa karega yaar. Why would you? And by the way, our holdings in FPI in equity is, I think, worth some $600 billion now. In debt, it's hardly $30 or $35 billion. So it's almost 20 times more in equity than
this is a kind of market which has to be opened up, And
can you imagine this? You know what this tells me? This tells me that we don't have confidence in our own growth. If we are not willing to borrow, and instead we want people to only come into risky equity, it means I don't have confidence in my own equity or in my own growth. If I'm confident about growth, I would not be. Which promoter, Varinder, would have 1:20 debt to equity? Nothing. As a country, we have done that. And every time I raise this issue, people say, "Oh, debt! You don't understand Argentina, Brazil." Arey, mere bhai, Argentina, Brazil ka you understand the scale. In Argentina, 70% of the debt is denominated in dollars. Yahan pe I'm talking about 2% going to 5%. Scale dekho yaar. Anyway, so broad point is.
No, you're right, sir. I absolutely agree with you. Okay, these are common things like a company can't do it, you're doing it for the country. Yeah. Simple si baat hai. You companies don't manage it. No, with lots of hope and prayers, for this beautiful country, India, not only for this 2022, but for many, many years ahead, sir. We keep the faith, trust in our hearts. Hoga, sir. बहुत अच्छा होगा इस देश के साथ. आज नहीं होगा, कल होगा, but धीरे-धीरे होगा पक्का.
Now, the good thing is, Varinder, irrespective of what you and I debate, this country will do well. We know that. I said, irrespective of what policy, jo bhi ho, the country will do well. The people are good. It's just that if we get some few basic things right, including investments in education, infrastructure, into healthcare, into nutrition, into public services, and of course into manufacturing and jobs and output, I think this country can achieve far more than we are achieving right now. We are on the right track. We will get there. I mean, thoda sabr rakhna padega. So we will get there.
हो रहा है. सब बदलाव हो रहा है, change हो रहा है, धीरे-धीरे हो रहा है, change हो रहा है, होगा. ये है कि धीरे-धीरे गाड़ी चलती रहे. Like small steps, it's okay, But let's see what comes in the budget. I don't hope anything, but ठीक है सर. आपसे बात करने का मौका मिल जाता है. That is what आपसे सीखने को मिल जाता है मौका. Thank you, sir. I love the energy what you have. I love the passion you have for this country. I love the detailing what you do. Honestly, it's just amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Varinder, and thank you for having me again.
अरे always. अगले साल फिर मिलेंगे सर.
बिल्कुल. Cheers, man. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye.